Test, test. Alright. Test, test. Alright. Alright, so today I was going to try and work on... Alright, let's stop that. I'm going to try and work on some podcasts, if anybody's interested in that. And if you're not, then there's other streamers to check out, I suspect. So, let's see if anybody said anything in my post about that. I said, hey, does anybody want to see this? And I got 1 retweet and no likes. So probably nobody wants to watch this. But, too bad, I need to get some stuff done. And maybe you'll find it interesting. Let's see. The other thing I was going to do is I wanted to make sure that I added a credit for music to code by, because Carl Franklin's been nice enough to let me use his music here, and this is probably a good spot to copy the URL from, and I can maybe throw that into one of my bots here, a timer bot. Let's see. Yeah, timer's a good one. Let's do a timer. Timer, music to code by. Message, music to code by, used with permission from Carl Franklin. Get it here. Boom. Alright, online interval. Let's say there. And there. Alright, now that should probably work. And I also have a bot if somebody wants to ask about music. Hey, Code Stencil. Oh shoot, I forgot the thing. I always forget. Man, I have a checklist and I didn't go off of it today. Don't I have a bot here? A widget? Or is it on the other one? Maybe it was this. I can't remember. Bot, chat commands. There we go. Music. That would be a good one. Let's add a command. Custom command. Good evening, Surly Dev. Add a new command called music response. Well, I suppose I can't change my music if I say this, but music is courtesy of Carl Franklin. Get music to code by here. We'll do that. Activate. Anybody want to test the music command? Just say bang music. Somebody? Hey, look at that. Thanks, Surly Dev. That actually works. I'm always impressed when this stuff works. Alright, now, one of these things would let me have a response even if it wasn't a command. Like if someone was like, hey, what's that music? That should trigger it too, shouldn't it? So, where's that go? I have something like that set up for Twitter. Hey, what's your Twitter? Some bot's supposed to do that. Stream elements. Okay, so I'm in the right place. This is stream elements. It's a bot. It's not a timer. I think the problem I ran into before was that it's like hidden under my start bar. Like it's like right there, and that's why I never could find it. So I gotta hide this thing. Auto hide. Or no, let's do this. There. No, don't go full screen. There. No, it's not there. Do you have a GitHub? I do have a GitHub. That should show up too, shouldn't it? Bots. It was in here somewhere. Chat alerts. No. No. It must be chat commands, shouldn't it? I don't know. Where'd I set up the Twitter thing? I like GitHub too. Yeah, I'm gonna have to go watch the YouTube where I set all this stuff up. Podcasts. Yeah, it was one of these. Alright, so here's what I did for Twitter. And, oh, it was an advanced thing. That's what it was. Alright, so let's go find music again. Music. They're not in alphabetical order. Music. Advanced settings. Command keywords and aliases. Okay, I don't need that. Keywords. I think music still works as a keyword. Be nice if I could hit save though, wouldn't it? Wouldn't that be a cool feature of this thing? Why can't I save this? Hey Kevin, welcome. Tell me what I'm doing wrong here, people. I can save it from the basic settings. That's good. Advanced settings. Oh, now it's there. Alright. It wasn't there before. You saw it. Alright, now. Isn't this great music? It's probably on a cooldown, because we already did something with the command for music. But maybe it'll work soon. Alright, how about GitHub? You were asking about GitHub. So, I don't know if I have a GitHub command. I do. And it says, under advanced settings, nothing. So let's do GitHub. Hello, Verkshada. Now it won't save again. That's weird. Alright, settings. Now you'll save. Advanced settings. Somebody needs to work on these web developers. GitHub. Now it's still good. Alright, second time is a charm, I guess. Oh, I should turn this off. That's chewing up CPU. Right. Today, let me... Oh, that's not even on this machine. That wasn't chewing up CPU. Today, let me come back to this machine and find a browser. Alright, we did this. That's good. Now I need to go out to Twitch and set my title channel thing that I forgot to do. Where's that? Dashboard. And we're going to record and edit and publish some podcasts. Is my plan. Recording, editing, publishing a couple of weekly dev tips podcasts, which are technical in nature, so hopefully it'll be interesting. And if you guys have questions or comments or feedback on it, I'm happy to answer them. And who knows, maybe some of you will get some information on how I actually record stuff, and maybe you'll tell me how to do it better. So I did a show on this last November, and a few people thought it was helpful. So if it's totally boring, I apologize. I'm not doing them every week. So what else? I guess I could do podcasting in here if that's a thing. Nope. Programming. There we go. Those are my usual things. And then this will be family friendly. Let's do that. Update. Alright, now somehow there's a way to get that title information into the chat as well, but I don't remember what that is. So I think we'll be done with that. And let me just verify. I got my little live icon. Now live doing stuff. Okay, good. And oh look, 2 people said they like this thing now. Fine. So someone from Italy would like to see it. Nice. Okay. So let's do that. We've got... That's done. Podcasting. There we go. Actually, podcast should be a keyword. There it is. Haha, look at that. But not podcasting, apparently. That's okay. We'll leave that one alone. Alright, so for me to do a podcast, I have actually got a checklist, which I use, because when I don't use my checklist, I forget things, like I did with my stream today, because I was on the phone call right up until I started. Alright, so here's my checklist, and I just publish my checklist on my blog, because then it might help other people. So there it is, if anybody wants to do this kind of thing themselves. And it says, have a transcript ready. Oh, I've got that. Let me get on the right machine now. And you know what? I'm going to take this out of that browser and bring it over out of my remote desktop. Normally I stream from a remote desktop because this machine I'm on here is old and slow, and it doesn't like to do all the CPU work of streaming and like building large projects on Visual Studio. But I solved that by keeping the weak machine as my streaming machine because I haven't bothered to move all my equipment around, and remoting into a machine that's right there in my office to do my work. But today we're going to be podcasting. Podcasting requires a microphone. My microphone I want to use is on this computer, and so I need to do things like launch Audacity here, not over there in the remote machine. Why do I have Rukashata in my clipboard? Weekly dev. I thought I had copied the URL to my thing for my checklist, but apparently not. Alright, so now we've got the checklist in the right computer. Let's throw this over here. Let's just stop remoting into this. And it says transcript ready. Got that. Alright, so let me show you my folder structure here for my podcast. So in here, for any of you that might care, I have a couple things that I don't really use. I've got an Audacity folder where I store all the Audacity projects. I've got the episodes folder, which has all the actual episodes that I've done once they're produced. When guests send me files, I throw them in here until I edit them. I didn't ever end up doing much with this, so I was going to have a standard intro, but I never used this because I think it's better to just say the intro differently each time, and I can update it from time to time. So I'll throw this in the archive right now, in fact. Likewise, I had some stock sounds that I found, and I'm not using any of those either. These are my transcripts. And then I have some videos too. So I've got videos that are up on YouTube, and as I get more videos, I throw them in here. And then everything's just in Dropbox, so I can do this from anywhere. You'd like to hear about GitHub Actions in my podcast if I get time. I was just playing with GitHub Actions this morning, actually. I set one up. Let's take a brief segue to talk about GitHub Actions. So here's github.com, whack Ardalis, whack specification, which I've done on stream here before, for the specification design pattern. And this, like over here, is a really nice plugin for GitHub. Name of which is escaping me at the moment. What is that called? Somebody tell me what this thing's called. It's Octotree. There we go. So anyway, if you're wondering what this is, it's Octotree. It's nice, and I want to unpin it and get it out of my way. There it goes. But normally I use that to have like a Solution Explorer tree view of GitHub repos. But what I want to show you is that I did get this working today, this GitHub action. And so this is actually being built on Azure Pipelines and on GitHub Actions currently. And GitHub Actions just get stored in this .github workflows folder. So we can go in here, and this is literally just the default ASP.NET Core YAML file that it uses. It's not exactly the same as Azure DevOps if you're familiar with their build pipeline, but it's very close. It's the same format. It's still YAML. It still has steps and everything set up similarly to Azure DevOps. So in this case, what it's going to do is it's going to just check out the stuff. It's going to make sure that it's got .NET installed with version 2.2 whatever, and then it's going to run .NET build, and that's it. And so if we jump back to the home page and we click on the build link, we will see here's all the builds from 3 hours ago when I first got this thing working, and you can look at any one of the builds and see, you know, what it did. Right, so there's its build. Got all the dependencies and then built the thing, and that's it. So I don't have it running tests or anything yet, but it shouldn't be difficult. And that's the extent of my knowledge about GitHub Actions at the moment. I've not done more than this. I'm pretty happy with Azure DevOps, honestly, but if I can keep everything here in GitHub, I'll be happier. So that's the thing that'll bring me this way. Alright, so in the podcast folder back here, this transcripts folder has my transcripts, where I try and write up what I'm going to say, because it makes it a lot more efficient when I'm going to record. So, and that's what's open in VS Code. So we'll get rid of this. We'll open up VS Code, and we'll say, hey, here's my transcript, and it doesn't need to be this wide because it's hard to read really wide stuff. So we'll make it less wide. In fact, we'll do Windows left and lock it there and lock this one there. And then once I close this, then this is pretty good. Alright, so interface segregation, that's the one I just did live. If we go out to weeklydevtips.com, this went live Monday. There it is, interface segregation. So I'm now on 56. So I can close everything but this one. And now I've just got 56. Alright. Now the boring part of the show is coming up here momentarily because I'm going to record all this. And I need to make sure my my separate microphone is here so that it can record. And I need to launch Audacity is probably the next step. So here we go, open Audacity and make sure it's set to mono. So I already have Audacity installed because I've recorded here before. And this is what Audacity looks like if you haven't used it. It's free and open source. Download it, install it. It does not come with support for MP3 built in because of licensing reasons. So you need to get lame separately, which is what this tells you right here. And then put it somewhere and then point Audacity at it. So I'm doing this already. You only have to do it once, but just FYI if you try and do this yourself. Alright, so now I'm ready to record the show. So it's, hit record and talk. I want to make sure this is using the right microphone, and so that's going to be this Rode Podcaster microphone, which I should be able to do, boom, 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 right? I'm tapping it and you can see it doesn't like that with these big red bars. So we'll kill that. Stop. Die. Alright. So the right mic is being used, which is always a good thing to test. If you go and do a 30-minute Pluralsight course module and then you realize that you're recording on your stupid little webcam mic, it's not really a good feeling when you're done and you go to edit. And I care more about the audio quality on the podcast than I do about the stream, typically. Which is why I'm using the better microphone with the pop filter and things like that. Audacity is pretty good, yes. And so let's see, we'll tweak this over here a little bit so folks can see what the mic setup looks like. My office is a bit of a mess, but so there's the microphone. It's on a boom that's actually back behind the desk. And then I've got a pop filter. I don't know if that really helps a whole lot, but I'm using that. This is a little laptop stand that I use sometimes, so that I can have a laptop and be on my desk up here. And then this is my treadmill desk that I use, that some of you have seen me walking on. So I'm preferring to keep the microphone a little farther away, because the Rode Podcaster mic is really nice, but it picks up everything, including like every time I open my mouth it goes and makes a little pop sound, which the pop filter is supposed to cover, like prevent, but it doesn't do it perfectly. And so breathing sounds and other things, speaking from experience, yeah, a little bit. I've screwed up the microphone thing before. Little sounds are annoying to have to edit out of this thing, because like breathing is another big one. And it's more tolerable, and there's not a whole lot I can do about it in a live stream like this. I can't edit out every little breath I take as I go, the Police song. But in the podcast, if I'm going along and I'm reading through the stuff and then it's like, it's annoying inside the podcast. At least it annoys me when I have to listen to it, so I try and edit those out. And that's the most tedious part of the recording process for me, is the editing. I could probably find someone to edit them down for me for not a lot of money, because they're fairly short. They're 5 or 10 minutes. But thus far, I've only done it myself. Alright, let's see. Any other questions? Veruca, I assume creating podcasts will be way easier in 2019. I'm behind for sure, or 2 ahead. I'm not sure what you mean by that. It can be easier if you use better software than Audacity, I'm guessing. Audacity, like I say, is free, so it's the easiest thing for anyone to get. And then equipment-wise, like the Podcaster mic I've had for about 10 years now. It was a couple $100 when I first bought it for Pluralsight use. But honestly, the difference in recording quality is not that different from this $29 USB headset mic that you're listening to me on now. And the podcast, yeah, okay. I'm checking. I'm looking at my OBS to make sure that the Rode Podcaster is muted, so that when I was tapping on that, it wasn't blowing your ears off while you're listening. So, looks like it is. All right. So, the podcast that I'm going to talk about here, and let's talk about it real quick before I actually record it and get any feedback that you have, is on having a one-step build, test, run process. And I actually did a Twitter poll on this not long ago. Let's see if I can find it. See what the poll is up to. It's like a 7-day poll that I think I did like yesterday, so it shouldn't be too far back here. There it is. So here's this poll, and I'll just throw it into the chat as well for anyone that wants it. And it says, how do you share your project's local build test process with the team? 40% say use a README, 20% say with a wiki, another 20 and 20 each say oral history or none needed. So oral history, I didn't really explain what that was, but that's like, we just tell people how to build the thing. You know, when you join the team, we tell you all the steps you have to take and which chickens you have to sacrifice on which days of the month to make it so the thing will actually build and deploy. And that's pretty much the worst scenario. I mean, it works if you have a really simple process. But this doesn't scale well, especially if you're in an enterprise. You have a lot of teams. They all want to build things similarly. You have people moving between teams. You have new people you're bringing on. You have contractors you're hiring. You have maybe a remote team where someone can't just stop by your cubicle or office and say, "Hey, did you change this thing?" Right. So documenting the process is the next best thing to having it all automated. So putting it in a README, you see like twice as many people like the README versus the wiki. And I'm in this camp, right? Because GitHub has spoiled us. And because we can go to GitHub and see on any given project, we see the README straight away without even having to open it. That's the expected place people are going to look. And then you might also have a wiki. And a wiki is a good place to have like additional documentation. You can have use cases, you can have requirements, you can have UI stuff in there, you can have walkthroughs and tutorials, you can have actual documentation. That stuff can all go in the wiki. But I think in the README, for the developers, in the root of the source control, I think the thing that the README absolutely should have is, how do I build, test, and run this thing on my local machine? Because that's the first thing that a developer is checking out this code is going to want to do. And it should be one line. It should be, run this script, right? That's what it ought to be. This none needed automated thing is, if you have that script and it's a convention and it's obvious, or it's the default for your framework, right? If it's open solution, hit F5. If that's your process, you probably don't have to document that, right? That's oral history, or that's so simple it's not needed. Or if you have a well-known, well-named script like build.sh or build.command or click-to-build.bat or whatever your naming convention might be, if right there in the root of the project it's obvious how to build it, then you don't need a lot of stuff in the README. If you are going to use the wiki, I strongly recommend, and a bunch of these people that are in this thread say that that's what they do, still have a README pointing to the wiki, right? If you just have a wiki and nothing, you don't have a README or you don't put anything in the README, that's not going to be ideal as far as discoverability goes. So that's kind of where I'm coming from with this tip, and that's what I'm going to do the podcast on. So you're getting like a preview of this. The other thing that you want to watch out for is if you do have README files, and later on you decide we're actually going to use some other thing, we're gonna use the wiki instead, or we're going to use a build script, make sure you update the README file. Don't leave that out there. Having bad information or outdated information is worse than having no information. If I don't find the information in the README, maybe I'll go look in the wiki. But if the information is actually in the wiki and the correct information is in the wiki, but the README file still says what used to be true 6 months ago, and I'm trying that and it's not working, I'm going to be frustrated. And I'm never going to check the wiki because I've got instructions right in front of me in the README file. Until I go and finally throw up my hands and ask somebody on the team, and they're like, "Oh yeah, why aren't you following the wiki?" I'm like, what wiki? What are you talking about? So communication is important here, and just little things can save your team a lot of time. Because I'm not going to ask somebody, at 30 seconds in. I'm gonna try and get it to work, right? I don't want to waste my teammates' time by bugging them about stuff. I might if I was pair programming all the time, or if I were co-located in the office, but I'm usually remote. And if I'm remote, I'm interrupting somebody every time I have a question. And so I'm going to try it out myself and make sure that I, try and troubleshoot and get through the problem myself before I ask. And if it's a problem that's, just a matter of I'm following the wrong instructions because somebody didn't update the docs, the README, then that's a very preventable waste of time. Markdown files, Kevin says, in a repo with architecture decision record markdown files and in DevOps for project, point at a README markdown file as root for new dev. I'm not following that. Markdown files in repo with decision record markdown files. Okay, so you've got some known architecture folder or docs folder that you put your decision records in. That's fine, that makes sense. And in DevOps, all right, project that points at the README for the root for a new dev. I would expect the README to point to the other places, not other things to point at the README. I'm not sure if that's what you're saying. Alright. Alright, so I didn't quite finish this. So let me just type up my last bit that I was going to say. What about wikis? Yada, yada, yada. Probably the worst thing you can do in documenting your build, your local build test run process is to start by putting it in the README file and then later decide to put the process in a wiki or another location, but not update the README. This will cause team members to use the README and not discover the new location, wasting lots of their time. Bad information is worse than no information. Put a link to the new process location, process documentation location in the README. That's probably enough. I don't know that I have a whole lot of links to talk about in here. Blah, blah, blah. Alright. eFlem. We have a README markdown file and it points to everything else. Perfect. That's what I would do. Eric. We've had a hub repo before because we had 30 plus repos that made up the system, and from the hub we'd put general overview docs and leverage the wiki, but with links to the repos of the other individual repos. Right, and probably links from the individual repos back to that hub one, right? Assuming, like I'm in a situation with one client right now where they have a wiki, but it's not just a wiki for the developers, and it's not just a wiki for how to build the project. It's a wiki for everything about their IT staff, right? And so, yes, somewhere in that wiki, there's a developer section. And somewhere under the developer section, there's a how to build such and such project section. And it's not exactly easy to discover. But you know what? That's why we have hyperlinks. So you put the hyperlink inside the local project README and point it right to the proper section inside the wiki. That works great, right? Now you've still got a centralized process, a centralized documentation of your standard enterprise process, but you've also made it easy to find from each individual repository. All right. Any other? I'm trying to think if there's any links I should add here. Let's see. I don't know if I've tweeted or blogged about this before. Or a tweet wouldn't matter, but if I've I don't see anything. All right, then I'll show you how I actually push this thing up to my podcast hosts here when we're done as well. Alright, so the part I'm most self-conscious about is actually recording this thing while people are listening to me on the stream, because I feel like that's going to be boring and I'm just reading my slides to you. So apologies in advance for that. You guys can tune me out or just listen along and then give me feedback on when my voice is awful or something. Alright, so we're ready to record. So if I look at the this thing, the podcast checklist one more time, hit record, I say here, leave 3 seconds of dead air at the start, so I have to remember that. And then I don't do this step 4 anymore. I mentioned I'm skipping that. So then all I do next, once I'm done recording, is start into the editing process. Yeah, I'll just ignore you guys while I'm reading this, because I can only read one thing, and the chat over here I'll just ignore. Alright, so let me save this, and let's do this recording. So, and I'm going to try and do 2 of these today, so you get a bonus. And like I say, they're fairly short. Yeah, and I did a search for one-click build or Dallas, and I didn't find anything. So, or maybe I did. What's that? From 2010. Oh, look, I do talk about it. All right, we'll throw that in there. Why not? It's a really old article, which I'll call it. Really old blog post on one-click builds. There we go. All right. Now we'll quit screwing around and actually record this thing. Right. All right. This is going to screw me up. I'm going to turn that off. Hi, and welcome back to Weekly Dev Tips. I'm your host, Steve Smith, aka R. Dallas. This is episode 56 on the importance of having a simple way to build, test, and run your application locally. This week's tip is brought to you by devbetter.com. If you need to level up your career, or you're looking for a mentor or the support of some motivated, tech-savvy peers, DevBetter is a group coaching program I started last year. We meet weekly for Q&A sessions and have an ongoing private Slack channel the rest of the week. I offer advice, there's networking opportunities, we do coding exercises, work on our marketing and branding, and occasionally assignments that help members improve. If you're interested, check it out at devbetter.com. Alright, so this week we're talking about having a single-step way for developers to build, test, and run applications, and how you document how you document that and share it with your team. I've worked on a lot of projects for a lot of different companies and teams. And one thing that dramatically increases the friction of becoming productive on a project is the number of manual and often undocumented steps required to take a new developer on a new machine and get them up and running the application from its source code locally. A lot of the time, the developers on the team don't even recognize this as an issue because they've all been there long enough that they've absorbed the knowledge that's been passed around through some shared oral history since the ancient times. But the new developers, and especially new developers on distributed teams, they weren't there last week when someone said, "Oh yeah, I changed this thing, so now you have to install this other tool before you run the app on your machine." They don't just magically know the arcane command line scripts that must be run from 4 different nested subfolders of the application source code just in order to get the system up and running. As soon as you have one new remote team member, it tends to expose all the implicit knowledge sharing and manual steps that have taken root in the team's processes, and hopefully forces the team to make these steps explicit and then to automate them as much as possible. Thanks for following, Danilko. Appreciate it. I'll edit that out of this podcast. All right. Simple projects don't require much, if any, documentation or automation. If you have an application that is so simple that any new developer can pull it down from source, use the default compilation step for the platform, like .NET Run or hitting F5 inside of Visual Studio, then you may not need any more documentation or automation than that. But when it's not that simple, you'll make everybody's life easier if you document and then automate the steps. Documentation should be first, since it just makes the steps explicit, and sometimes automation can be difficult to achieve, especially if you need to work across different operating systems. This is getting easier though, and once you have the steps documented, you should strive to automate them to the point where common tasks are a single step. Ideally, you want to have a one-step build, test, run script that does all of these things. It builds the app, it runs tests against it, and then it runs the app. Now, there's a bunch of different scripts and tools that you can use to achieve this. I'm not going to get into those inside this podcast, but at a bare minimum, you should be able to write a script in your shell script of choice, or a batch file or some PowerShell that just runs the various command line tools that you would normally have to run by hand to get the application to run. Now, before we get that far, let's talk about how to document the process a bit more. Today, GitHub has become the standard for open source software projects, and GitHub has essentially codified the standard that projects should have a readme.md file in their root that describes what the project is. Even if you're not hosting your application's code on GitHub, it's a good guess that your dev team has looked at projects on GitHub and is familiar with this convention. Every project on GitHub, even if you don't open the README file, displays the README at the root of each repo. Thus, purely from a discoverability standpoint, the best place to put important steps for building and running your app is in its README file in the root of its repository. If you have a lot of repositories that all use the same steps, and you don't want duplication by putting the same information in a lot of different README files, then put a link to your shared documentation into each README file. What about wikis? Wikis are another common place to put this information, but they're far less discoverable. They're not right there in your face when you hit the home page of a repository. They're often listed but not used on many repositories or projects, and they're also not right there with your code when you're looking at your source in your favorite editor. If you open up a repository in Visual Studio Code, the README file is going to be right there with all of the source code. You can edit it, you can read it right along with the code. That's not true with a wiki. You can certainly put more detailed documentation and steps and tutorials into a wiki if you like, but to make it discoverable, you should put links to it in the README file. If you use some CMS system or project management system, the answer is going to be the same. Use the README as the place to include links to where that relevant information is located so that new team members don't have to try and find it themselves. HTML supports hyperlinks for a reason. Probably the worst thing you can do in documenting your local build, test, run process is to start by putting it in the README file, but then later decide to put it somewhere else. And then you don't update the README. Now, this will make it so that team members will continue to use the README file and not discover the new location. Because why would they go looking for a new location? The information's still right there in the README. It's just out of date and wrong. Right? So now they're going to waste a lot of time, and they're not going to be able to get the thing working until they finally get around to asking someone on the team why their build isn't working, at which point maybe someone will point them at the wiki or the new location. So remember, bad information is worse than no information. This is one of the reasons why code comments can be so dangerous, is because when they become out of date, they point to developers in the wrong direction, which is worse than if the comment wasn't there at all. Put a link to where your process documentation is in the README if you don't actually put it in the README itself. And even better still, create some kind of a one-step build process that you can just call directly from the command line or double-clicking inside your folder. All right, if you have any tips on a build process that you like, leave a comment on the show or hit me up on Twitter at @weeklydevtips. That's it for this week. If you want to hear more from me, go to ardalis.com/tips. Sign up for a free tip in your inbox every Wednesday. I'm also streaming programming topics on twitch.tv/ardalis most Fridays at noon Eastern Time. Thanks for subscribing to Weekly Dev Tips, and I'll see you next week with another great developer tip. Okay. I like devbetter.com. Sign up is just as easy as one click. Okay, cool. You gotta probably do more than that, though. And Daniilko is blocked at work from what? From devbetter.com? Really? It's a single page static site on Azure. Why would someone go to the trouble of blocking it? Or are you blocked from Twitch? I don't know. I'm not sure which thing Daniilko's blocked at. Okay, so that was the recording part. And it's warm in here. I need some water. So let's do the editing part, which I said is my least favorite part of this. So we come in here, and there's what it looks like, and we go back to my checklist so I don't forget things. And my checklist says that the next thing, nope, that's not it. The next thing I need to do is find 3 seconds of dead air. So we come in here, hit home, we're at the beginning, and find 3 seconds of dead air, effect, noise reduction, get noise profile. So this picks up whatever the noise in my office is, which is my computer fan and things like that. Then we hit Control A to select everything, and we do an effect, noise reduction, and we hit OK, and it will theoretically reduce the noise. Now, it's probably not nearly as good as some Adobe tool or some commercial tool for podcasting, but it's not terrible. And you can see there was some stuff here that's not there anymore, so it cleaned that up. All right, now I don't need 3 seconds of dead air anymore, so we'll delete that. And what else do I do? Then we do normalize, amplify. All right, so at this point we do Control A again, we do effect, we say normalize. This isn't usually going to do a whole lot because it was just me talking at relatively the same volume from the same distance from the microphone for the whole podcast. But this one matters more when you have guests and they have different environments where they're recording, and you splice them together, or one's on Skype and you're local. Things like that will make this more important. But I still do it just as a matter of course, and it does whatever it does. And then I amplify because just to make sure it's not too quiet. This probably doesn't need it, but again, I just make sure Control A, amplify, and it defaults to a small amount of amplification. So if you watch these graphs here, say OK, and it just boosts it slightly. Okay, Surly Dev thinks this is cool. That's good. I think this is tedious as heck, but it's cool for the first 30 seconds. Now wait for the tedious part. Hi, and welcome back to Weekly Dev Tips. I'm your host, Steve Smith, aka R. Dallas. This is episode 56. All right, so you can see here is where I was breathing. I'll probably leave that alone. It's not too bad. But if you have a lot of those throughout there, it gets tedious to pull them out. This is episode 56 on the importance of having a simple way to build, test, and run your application locally. This week's tip. All right, so those little things can drop out of there. This week's tip is brought to you by devbetter.com. If you need to level up. All right, so these things, this is the most annoying thing. That's me like going, but the microphone picks it up even with the pop filter. So if you need to level up your career, or you're looking for a mentor or the support of some motivation, there are automated tools that'll pull that out. I know because Pluralsight runs them on everything, and they just do it. They have the software that just takes care of it. So I may have to try and figure out how that's done because it just bugs me having to pull those things out. And I've tried using a pop filter, and it's not sufficient. Or maybe I just need to get over it. All right, where was I? Okay, so I'm scanning through here using Shift mouse wheel, and then I'm zooming in with Control mouse wheel, right? So that's how you navigate through the timeline, and then you can click wherever you want in here to jump around. There's some motivated, tech-savvy peers. DevBetter. Right, so there. If I want to pull that breath sound out of there, I can either delete it, in which case this obviously gets quicker. The other thing you can do is right here, you can silence it. And so then it's tech-savvy peers. DevBetter is a group. It's probably better a little bit shorter, so we'll cut it a little bit. Motivated, tech-savvy peers. DevBetter is a group coaching program I started last year. We meet weekly for Q&A sessions and have an ongoing private Slack channel the rest of the week. I offer advice, there's networking opportunities, we do coding exercises, work on our marketing and branding, and occasionally assignments that help members improve. If you're interested, check it out at devbetter.com. All right, so this week we're talking about having a single-step way for developers to build, test, and run applications, and how you document how you document that. All right, so there's where I flubbed something, right? And how you documentate. I should have left that in. Documentate. It's a new word. Documentate. So we'll just cut that out. And how you document that. Right, so let's see. I guess say how you and how you document. And how you document that and share it with your team. I've worked on a lot of projects for a lot of different companies and teams, and one thing that dramatically increases the friction of becoming productive on a project is the number of manual and often undocumented steps required to take a new developer on a new machine and get them up and running the application from its source code locally. A lot of the time, the developers on the team don't even recognize this as an issue because they've all been there long enough that they've absorbed the knowledge that's been passed around through some shared oral history since the ancient times. But the new developer the ancient times. But the new developers, and especially new developers on distributed teams, they weren't there last week when someone said... So Code Stencil's asking about the decibel level. I keep it like like you said. I look for the red on the volume when I'm recording here. It's not doing it right now because I'm not recording, but it'll show a bar. As far as in here, I pretty much just listen for it. So I set my volume as I'm listening to they weren't there last to whatever level and make sure it sounds audible. And if I didn't do it this time. Usually I'll check that at like 50% and make sure I can still easily hear it. They weren't there last week when someone said, "Oh yeah, I changed." And I don't know if that's affecting how you guys are hearing this or not. Does my volume here for my speaker, does that change the streaming audio, or did I just get quieter? Probably not. Hopefully not. Anyone? Hopefully you guys can still hear me. Test, yeah. No, it didn't change it. Okay, good. Yeah, so if I can hear it reasonably when my headphone volume here is at, like, say, 50%, the Audacity audio got louder. Okay. I'm not sure what I did about that, but... did I change that somewhere? That would be this. But that's tied to this. Yeah, those are tied together. So... Anyway, that's my test. I don't have a specific decibel range that I aim for. I'm just kind of eyeballing this and then using my ear and listening to it. Yeah, I'm not sure why there's the lag. That might be a result of the fact that my machine is working hard because I'm not using the separate machine. So like here's my CPU. OBS Studio is using a lot of CPU, but it's not maxed out, so that shouldn't be too bad. So I'm not sure what the delay is from. It could also be Twitch encoding stuff or something. Code Stencil says he's not seeing the lag, so maybe it's just you, Surly Dev. I don't know. Maybe you guys just aren't quick on the reply on the chat when I ask questions. Teams. They weren't there last week when someone said, "Oh yeah, I changed this thing, so now you have to install this other tool before you run the app on your machine." They don't just... Yeah, and at 50% volume, I can't really even hear the breath sound, so that's good. I'm going to crank this back up just so I can hear them better. Run the app on your machine. They don't just... Alright, and these have keyboard shortcuts too, like this one's Control-L, which I could probably change maybe, but Control-L is annoying because it needs two hands for me if I have my left hand on the keyboard. Or, I'd rather something that was something over on the left side of the keyboard. Your machine. They don't just magically know the arcane command line scripts that must be run from 4 different nested subfolders of the application source code. So this is actually a real thing that I have on an app that I'm working on right now for a client, so this is not something I made up. From 4 different nested subfolders of the application source code. There literally is, like, the instructions are go into 4 different levels within a subfolder hierarchy. I read the README in each one and run a command in each one. As part of the process of getting the thing running locally. It's so much fun. Source code, just in order to get the system up and running. As soon as you have one new remote team member, it tends to expose all the implicit knowledge sharing and manual steps that have taken root in the team's processes, and hopefully forces the team to make these steps explicit and then to automate them as much as possible. Thanks for following, Daniilko. Appreciate it. I'll edit that out of this podcast. All right. As much as possible. Simple projects don't require much, if any, documentation or automation.
If you have an application that is so simple that any new developer can pull it down from source, use the default compilation step for the platform, like .NET Run or hitting F5 inside of Visual Studio, then you may not.
So once you start hearing these breath sounds, they're like hard to not hear. Also, you can see them here. If you're just listening to the podcast, you won't really notice them. Like I try and notice breath sounds when I hear people on the radio, and I notice them if I'm looking for them, but I don't otherwise.
Step for the platform, like .NET Run or hitting F5 inside of Visual Studio, then you may not need any more documentation or automation than that. But when it's not that simple, you'll make everybody's life easier if you document and then automate the steps. Documentation should be first, since it just makes the steps explicit, and sometimes automation can be difficult to achieve, especially if you need to work across different operating systems. This is getting easier though. And once you have the steps documented, you should strive to automate them to the point where common tasks are a single step. Ideally, you want to have a one-step build, test, run script that does all of these things. It builds the app, it runs tests against it, and then it runs the.
So by this time it sounds like I've been running a marathon and I'm out of breath.
And then it runs the app. Now there's a bunch of different scripts and tools that you can use to achieve this. I'm not going to get into those inside this podcast, but at a bare minimum, you should be able to write a script in your shell script of choice or a batch.
So you can tell when I go off script because that's when
choice.
That's when I start saying
in your shell script of choice or a batch file or some PowerShell that just runs the various command line tools that you would normally have to run by hand to get the application to run. Now, before we get that far, let's talk about how to document the process a bit more. Today, GitHub has become the standard for open source software projects, and GitHub has essentially codified the standard that projects should have a README.
I don't know if it was codified or codified. In my head, I was trying to pick one. I think codified is right.
Should have a readme.md file in their root that describes what the project is. Even if you're not hosting your application's code on GitHub, it's a good guess that your dev team has looked at projects on GitHub and is familiar.
Hey, Code Stencil, thanks. I'm glad you're finding this useful. Like, I figure most developers would rather see code, so. But I was watching a podcast I rated a couple weeks ago where someone was, doing graphics for, it was Luna, was doing graphics, designing a character for a 3D game, and like she's literally painstakingly adjusting the look of a character's face for like an hour and a half. And I was like, okay, I mean, if people are willing, like, and she had way more followers than I have, so I was like, if people are willing to watch someone painstakingly tweak, what someone looks like in a 3D editor for hours, maybe they'd look at how someone records a podcast. So, and thankfully my podcasts are short, so.
It's a good guess that your dev team has looked at projects on GitHub and is familiar with this.
All right, these stupid clicks get me though. Go away.
And is familiar with this convention. Every project on GitHub, even if you don't open the README file, displays the README at the root of each repo. Thus,
So sometimes, even though it doesn't show anything here visually, you can hear, like right here, there's nothing there. But there's something there. So you might not even hear it in the produced MP3, but I still just clean it up.
Thus, purely from a discoverability standpoint, the best place to put important steps for building and running your app is in its README file in the root of its repository. If you have a lot of repositories that all use the same steps and you don't want duplication, by putting the same information in a lot of different README files, then put a link to your
Yeah, there's a great book called The Checklist Manifesto. I have not read. I've read parts of it, but I heard like on NPR an interview with the author, and it was very interesting. So yeah, I'm a fan of checklists as a precursor to automation. But this book was written by a surgeon, I believe, doctor certainly. I don't remember if he was a surgeon. I think he was. This one. And the interesting story I remember from the podcast interview was that they studied this with a bunch of doctors. They made checklists for things that surgeons should do before, during, and after doing a surgery. And yeah, probably. I'm not sure if he's from Canada, but I'm not sure. So anyway, they did this study, and then they had all the doctors that participated. They had them take a survey afterward and say like, "Hey, what do you think? Would you use this process in your thing?" And like, like 40% or 50% said, "Yeah, I thought it was good. I would use it." But then they asked this other question, which I thought was great, where they said, "Okay, now if you were getting surgery, how many of you would want your doctor to follow the checklist?" It was like 98%. Like some high 90% was like, "Yes, other doctors definitely should use this." So they all thought it was a good idea for other doctors, but of course they were smart enough they didn't need it. And yeah, so checklists are something I'm a fan of, as long as I remember to use them. That should be step one on my checklist, is use the checklist. And I definitely use it every time when I'm doing the podcast editing. So right now I'm here on step 9. Yeah, right. I do.
Then put a link to your shared documentation into each README file. What about wikis? Wikis are another common place to put this information, but they're far less discoverable. They're not right there in your face when you hit the home page of a repository. They're often listed but not used.
Right, Surly Dev. That's a good one. That way you got some momentum, right? Yep.
A repository. They're often listed but not used on many repositories or projects. And they're also...
I think I should have gone into more detail here. Like, because they're listed but not used, developers don't automatically go looking for them, because just because there's a link to a wiki doesn't mean there's anything there. So often you'll go look and find the wiki is empty, so you just stop looking. At least I do. But hopefully maybe the point comes across.
Or projects. And they're also not right there with your code when you're looking at your source in your favorite editor. If you open up a repository in Visual Studio Code, the README file is going to be right there with all of the source code. You can edit it, you can read it right along with the code. That's not true. If you open up a repository in Visual Studio Code, the README file is going to be right there with all of the source code. You can edit it, you can read it right along with the code. That's not true in the README file. If you like, but to make...
All right, I got lost where I was. Right here. There we go. Sorry, I'm trying to read the comments. Don't read the comments.
Right along with the code. That's not true with a wiki. You can certainly put more detailed documentation and steps and tutorials into a wiki if you like, but to make it discoverable, you should put links to it in the README file. If you use some CMS...
Alright, considering your episodes are so short, I just looked at the stats page on Podcast Republic, and yours is second at 10 hours and 19 minutes. I don't know what that... I don't use Podcast Republic. Mine is second out of what? Mine's not popular at all. Listen to a podcast, right? I do stream elements. That's what I was saying. Nice. I wonder if it counts a second or third listen. Some episodes I've listened to multiple times. I'm not sure. I think it counts downloads. I don't know if it counts listens, unless that Podcast Republic is itself actually a player. Is it an app that you listen to the podcast in? Because most of the stats I have is on downloads, and it's like, hey, the Apple Podcast app downloaded the thing, and then you would, if you listen to it 5 times, it's still only downloaded at one time. Second out of your list of podcasts that you listen. Oh, okay. So I'm second on your list. That's pretty cool.
You should put links to it in the README file. If you use some CMS system or project management system, the answer is going.
I would guess it counts
System
every minute you listen. So if you listen to it twice, it probably counts it twice.
The answer is going to be the same. Use the README as the place to include links to where that relevant information is located, so that new team members don't have to try and find it themselves. HTML find it themselves. HTML supports hyperlinks for a reason. Probably the worst thing you can do in documenting your local build, test, run process is to start by putting it in the README file, but then later decide to put it somewhere else. And then you don't update the README. Now, this will make it so that team members will continue to use the README file and not.
This is also a thing that recently happened to me on a real project.
File.
So your podcast can just be a place where you go and rant about things that you don't like that people are doing on your projects. And if you're like me and you have a podcast that almost no one listens to, they'll never know.
File. And not discover the new location. Because why would they go looking for a new location? The information's still right there in the README. It's just out of date. And wrong. Right? So now they're going to waste.
That doesn't work. All right, so sometimes when I do this and I highlight, I want to use the arrow keys to change the highlight. And, and I usually want it to go from whichever part I touched last, right? So if I drag from the left and finish on the right, when I do shift arrow, I expect the right to be the thing that's still movable, right? And it never is. Like, I can make it wider to the left, I can make it wider to the right. Sorry about that, but I don't know how to make it smaller. There must be another key somewhere that I have to hit to make it smaller. That just doesn't work the way I would expect.
And wrong, right? So now they're going to waste a lot of time, and they're not going to be able to get the thing working until they finally get around to asking someone on the team why their build isn't working. Why their build isn't working. Their team why their build isn't working, at which point maybe someone will point them at the wiki or the new location. So remember, bad information is worse than no information. This is one of the reasons why code comments can be so dangerous, is because when they become out of date, they point to developers.
No. This is me just riffing again without having a script.
They point to developers.
No, that didn't work.
They point developers in the wrong direction, which is worse.
Instead of shift, I use control. Is that what you're saying? Control will make it smaller? No, I'm holding control. It doesn't do anything. Shift will make it bigger. Control doesn't do it. Alt doesn't do it. I tried up and down instead of left and right. That didn't do it. So I don't know how to shrink my selection. I mean, I'm sure I could go find it, right? Select region. No. Yeah, I don't know. Not important right now. Shift left moves the start of the selection earlier. Shift right moves the end. Yeah, I know. I got that. I want to move it. I want to move the start of it later or the end of it earlier. That's what I don't know how to do.
which is worse than if the comment wasn't there at all.
Right, so I'm here. I can say hold shift, left, left, left. It gets bigger. Right, right, right. It still gets bigger. Now I want to make it smaller. How do I make it smaller? Control shift. Oh, there you go. Awesome. Thank you, Surly Dev. You didn't say control shift. You just said control. All right. Cool. Now that's one less thing I need to get perfect with my mouse.
The comment wasn't there at all. Put a link to where your process documentation is in the README if you don't actually put it in the README itself. And even better still, create some kind of a one-step build process that you can just call. Build process that you can just call directly from the command line or double-clicking inside your folder. All right, if you have any your folder.
No,
All right, if you have
no worries, Surly Dev. I appreciate it. I'll try and remember that now. That's the new trick, because I've been doing this for so long. I got to add the control thing to my muscle memory.
All right, if you have any tips on a build process that you like, leave a comment on the show or hit me up on Twitter at @weeklydevtips. That's
That's gonna be too short. Let's see. Get rid of that. Silencio that.
Weekly Dev Tips. That's it for this week. If you want to hear more, from me, go to ardallas.com/tips. Sign up for a free tip in your inbox every Wednesday. I'm also streaming
right now. I almost said.
I'm also streaming programming topics on twitch.tv/ardallas most Fridays at noon Eastern Time. Thanks for subscribing to Weekly Dev Tips, and I'll see you next week with another great developer tip.
So I thank them for subscribing because I'm assuming, of course, they're subscribing. They're not just listening to it one time on the web browser. But they must have obviously subscribed to the thing. All right, so we're done editing, so that's cool. All right, so I'm hoping to like subtly convince them that they should subscribe with that. I don't know if it works. It's mind control. All right, so we're gonna save this thing now, and I gotta go find a project for it. And what did I call this? This is one step build test run. So I need to create a folder for it. It's number 56 056 one step build test run, and then in there I need to do a project. So when you save stuff in Audacity, it saves it as a project, just like Visual Studio and other stuff. You should have done, did you encourage sharing with colleagues? I did not. I should do that. You should have done episode 56. I don't know what you're saying there. Yes, it is episode 56. Maybe you're telling me. All right. That was too quick for you. All right. So now Audacity has export to different formats. So I'm going to export twice. I'm going to export once as a WAV file, and my WAV file goes right there actually. Save that. I don't care about any of that. So, well, hang on. Reset. No, hang on. Let me try that again. Files, export, WAV. That's the right place. Save it, and sure, let's fix it. So, one step build test run. So this is the metadata, which apparently WAV files also have, but I don't care about it for the WAV file because the WAV file is just going to get used for the YouTube video. But it's going to reuse this probably for the MP3. So if I update it now, I'll still get to use it for that. So, yay. Add that there. So, okay. Now it saved the WAV file. Now we're going to MP3 it. Export MP3. And I got to find the right folder, which is in Dropbox or Dallas, Podcast, Audacity, 56. Here we go. And I use medium fast and export mono. So I'm only recording it with one microphone. There's no reason for me to use stereo. Exporting MP3 is lame. Indeed, it uses lame as the library, which I mentioned up here. You have to have the lame DLLs for that to work. Why are you exporting to WAV? I have someone that does these nice visualizations for me. What's the easiest way for me to find this? I don't even know how to find my own thing. Oh, there we go. So something like this. And she builds
Hello,
these
welcome
with...
to Weekly Dev Tips. I'm Steve.
Right, so...
If those others feel unappreciated,
She adds this on top of the WAV file and then produces the video for me. And the software she's using expects a WAV file, so I use a WAV file. And that's the reason. So there you go. Save the MP3. Look at that, it saved all my stuff. So keep the metadata the same, so okay. And now I've got an MP3. Let's go back to here. What do we do? Save the project, export the audio, use these options, blah, blah, blah. Now we can go open the folder, podcast, Audacity, 56. We can verify the properties here right in Windows. You can go hit the details. And if there's anything here I want to update, like, author URL can be weeklydevtips.com. That's usually about the only one I think I add. So that's all good. So, okay. And then copy it to the episodes folder. So take that. I'll even cut it because I don't need it here anymore. Podcast, episodes, paste. Now it's over here with all the other ones. Now I need a browser. No, hang on. I need my other browser. Sketch notes, yeah, exactly. Never looked on YouTube. Gonna check those. Yeah, they're a little bit behind. Like episode 13 is the most recent one. But I was talking to somebody, a client of mine, a couple years ago, or last year, and he said that a lot of people use YouTube as their podcast client, and they just go to a playlist on YouTube and listen like that. And I knew a ton of people did that with music, which is a huge waste of bandwidth, but but I didn't realize it was a thing for podcasting, so I figured I'd throw the podcast out there too and see if anybody, found them and listened to them that way. And the answer to that question is, we go here. The answer is no. Nobody listens to them on here because I get about 3,000 downloads per episode these days. And these things have been out here for 6 months and they've got 110, 92, like most of them haven't gotten 100 views. So is it worth it? So far no. I've got 200 subscribers, but most of them don't watch anything. But that's the idea, was that maybe I'd attract more listeners on YouTube. And the sketch notes were something I could do after the fact, right? Like for this podcast, I could probably edit down some piece of the stream where I'm recording it and talking about it and adding in little extra things and put that on YouTube. But I couldn't do that after the fact, right? Because these earlier podcasts, I didn't record these on a stream, and most of my podcasts I don't record on a stream. So I thought the sketch notes was a good idea to visualize something, so that you're not just looking at like this podcast logo for the whole time or whatever. If you're looking at it at all, right? If you're literally using it as your podcast client and you're playing the YouTube app on your phone while you drive your car, you shouldn't be looking at it anyway. In which case the visualization doesn't matter. But hopefully it helps some people retain the information better, was kind of my thought. Alright, so I need a different browser because that's the one I log into Simplecast with. And just duplicate this tab and we'll bring it over here. And here's Simplecast, right? And I can mess around with that, but I want to add an episode. And so we're adding an episode, and our title is One Step Build Test Run. Yeah. And Simplecast changed their system a little bit ago, and they changed their URLs. And so they're using more SEO-friendly URLs, but my standard for all my URLs for a long time was a very short, like /056 would have been my episode URL. And I'm starting to lean toward using their URLs because this will probably help with SEO, even if it's not my standard. So I think I'm going to keep their title-based URL here. And at the same time, Apple came down on people that were putting episode numbers in their titles, right? So I used to have, this would say something like 056 : right? And Apple will delist you if you do that now, apparently. So I don't do that anymore. And I pulled it off of all my old ones. So the episode number is less discoverable. I think I'll probably just leave this one like this. We'll see how it goes. All right, so drag and drop your audio file. It's right here. Boom. And then episode summary. There's a reason why I put this stuff up here separately, because I can steal it and make that my summary. I don't really need the high bit. That's it. All right. And then I just do Control A, everything else over here. There's a few typos in here that I noticed while I was recording, but I think it's probably okay. If you're, there we go, that's the one that was bothering me. If you have an application, take that, throw that in here. This thing accepts Markdown, so here's what it's going to look like, more or less. I don't have any links in the thing, but I don't think I really need any. Okay. Stick with the episode number, please, if you can. Why would they do that? Well, I know. It's annoying. I think they did it just purely for SEO reasons. Episode contributors. That would be just me, I suppose. Search keywords. What would we search on for this? This would be clean code. This would be programming. This would be build process. This would be DevOps. This would be CI. Continuous integration. Talked about GitHub. Talked about best practices. Talked about software development, code, stuff like that. What am I missing? Programming, software, that's probably close enough. And it's going to be public, and the alternate episode, no. Alright, so then I just want to, I want to schedule it. Where's the next step here? Save the draft. I guess that's what I do next. Alright, now I can schedule it. And I want this to be for Monday, and Monday is the 7th. No, it's not. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong... I put my calendar over there on the wrong month. It's looking at October. Right, Monday is the 9th. And I do it at 2 o'clock in the morning. But look at this. They're all ... It doesn't work. The UI has issues. But it's still there. You can still pick 2. That's it. So this will go live on Monday. Schedule. Okay. Anybody have any questions about this process? And that will send me an email. Let's see. Where's my email? Well, it didn't send it yet, but as soon as it finishes processing this, it will email me and tell me, hey, we processed your thing. So this is a good example of how to do an async process in a web page, honestly, because you're able to upload this episode, not on this screen anymore, but when I was on the add a podcast screen, I could upload this file, and then it had to do background processing on this. It has to transcode it or whatever it does to clean it up to make it ready for their podcast. And it didn't do that, in response to me clicking a button and then making me sit there and wait for a web request to complete, right? It does it in the background. It has some worker role. Maybe it's running in Azure, or it's on AWS. I don't know. Uh, but somewhere in the background, it's doing that processing, and then when it's done, it lets me know. It sends me an email, or it does some other way of letting me know out of band that it did that process. So when you have long running processes in your web apps, that's a good pattern to follow. All right, so that was a podcast, and that's for September 9th. But we're not done. I'm going to do another one. So let's go back over here. Let's come in here. Let's go over here. I'd like to say this is going to be so much faster, but it's really not, because I need to work on writing this one up a little bit. So Inversion. This one's not quite as done as the other one. So let me think about this for 1 second, and I'm not going to need that. Does anybody who's on stream, do you have any questions? Any questions about podcasting? You have any questions about dependency inversion? I've been doing a series here under my episodes on the podcast on Solid. So I started off here with introducing Solid back in May, and then we did single responsibility, and then we did open, close, listgov, interface. So the last one is going to be D, which is dependency inversion principle. And I do have a couple of Pluralsight courses on this topic, and so I'm not obviously going to dive into it in quite the depth that I would on Pluralsight, but I'm hoping to offer some tips on why dependency inversion is valuable. Alright, Surly Dev seems to be the only one that was talking to me, and he's gone to get my dinner to his mums. So let's assume the rest of you have got better things to do for now, and I'm going to just type this up real quick. Hey, Surly Dev. You get to watch me type for a few minutes. Or we could have a discussion about the dependency inversion principle. dependency inversion. So basically, the dependency inversion principle has two parts. Talks about high-level and low-level modules, and says high-level should not depend on low-level, which is often how it works. I don't want to be that opinionated. We'll just say don't use abstractions. We won't say properly. So either the high-level modules depend on the low-level modules in a lot of systems, or the high-level logic is mixed in with low-level concerns in the same modules. Both of these approaches violate the dependency inversion principle. Instead, these modules should communicate with one another using abstractions like C# or Java interfaces. Both kinds of modules would depend on a common interface. Typically with the low-level module implementing the interface and the high-level module calling it. The second part suggests that abstractions interfaces typically should not depend on quit arguing with my bots, early dev. Should not depend on details. So an example of this would be if you had an interface for fetching details about the customer. One approach would be to write the interface so that it returned a SQL data reader as its return type, where the data reader had the details of the customer. This exposes the, I don't like this, I'm using the word details too much. Fetching information about a customer that had the customer info. This exposes the details of how the data is stored, since you would only use a SQL data reader to fetch the data from a SQL database. The benefit of following the dependency inversion principle is modularity. You could change that interface to return a simple list of customer type, and that list of customer could come from any number of storage locations, from databases to files to in-memory stores or web APIs. Alright, abstractions should not depend on details, details should depend on abstractions. So that covers how abstractions should not depend on details. What about the last bit that says details should depend on abstractions? That's talking about your low-level modules that actually communicate with I/O. These should depend on the interface is by implementing them. If you're building a system composed of multiple projects, it can be extremely difficult to follow the dependency. I want to say DI, but people get that confused with dependency injection. Dependency inversion principle. If you don't structure your project dependencies appropriately, this means ensuring that your abstractions, your interfaces, live in a project alongside your business model entities, and that your implementation details live in another project that references this one. I have a GitHub repository and solution template called Clean Architecture that you can use as a starting point for new ASP.NET Core applications that need to follow solid principles and use clean architecture. Right. What else about that? You'll find a link to it in the show notes, or just Google or Dallas Clean Architecture. A key benefit of clean architecture that is enabled by following the dependency inversion principle is that your business model has no dependencies on external infrastructure inserts. These dependencies are a huge part of why legacy codebases are often difficult or impossible to write unit tests for. By keeping these dependencies separate and in their own project that other projects do not depend upon, it makes it much easier to unit test the most important part of your application, its business domain model. I'll talk more about this in my D2D fundamentals course with Julie Lerman on Pluralsight, if you want to see this in action. You can also check out the eShop on web reference application that I built for Microsoft and its companion book, whose title is too long for me to ever remember. What is that book called? Architecting Modern web applications with ASP, .NET Core, and Microsoft Azure. Alright, that's probably good enough. What else should I say about dependency inversion principle? Anybody from the audience? Surly Dev, you're telling me that I can keep the episode numbers if I want to and just keep them out of iTunes? Yeah, that was more effort, and Apple oftentimes ends up setting trends on this, so even if I did that, I figure eventually others would follow their lead and be picky about it as well. So, alright, so let's add a couple hyperlinks to this. We want to do clean architecture, Dallas. There's that. Or just do that. I have a GitHub repo called CleanAct right there. I'll take that and we'll copy that over here. We'll put it right here. There we go. And let's do I've already got this link. Hang on, right there. Copy that into here. Solid principles. There's that. And DDD fundamentals. Let's do that. And then eShop on web. Alright, there's my transcript. Sorry if that was terribly boring to have to watch, but let's see if we can record it real quick. So we can go back to my checklist, which was over here somewhere. Alright, have a transcript ready. Got that. Open Audacity. Got that. Maybe? There it is. Got that. Let's do a file new. There we go. Close this one. Set to record. Yeah, it should be the default. Alright, ready, record, leave 3 seconds of dead air. So, get rid of this. Put this over here. No. There, yes. That there. Test the mic. It's gotta be good still, right? Dun dun dun. Yeah, that's still good. And here's that track I was talking to somebody about. If I get it way loud like this, nope, it still didn't hit it. It's only when I tap it that it gets into the red. So, should be fine. Alright, stop that. Delete that. Alright, any last questions on this dependency inversion stuff? This is my last of the solid principles tips. Is there enough of a tip here? I mean, I'm pretty much just kind of telling you what the principle means, but I guess I am saying, like, hey, don't do this, you know, don't return SQL data reader, and don't do some of these other things. So I think it's a tip. I think it works. And it's short and sweet, and if you've never heard of solid before, hopefully it whets your interest enough that you go and learn more. So it should be good. Alright, I should probably grab some more water, but I don't have any handy. So Not trying to be surly, but what's the point of having a check? Well, my checklist doesn't actually say to test the mic, to be fair. Alright, so you're telling me to do things that aren't even on my checklist, surly dev. So if I want to follow your advice, I shouldn't be doing that. Now, should it be on there? Yeah, probably, because I did make a point that it ought to be there. So let's let's do that. Ardalis.com, let's go to WP admin, log in. You need to add it. Yes, yes. Is it a post? No, it's a page. Page. Really? Maybe it's a post. Must be a post. So I have a bunch of different checklists. If you search for checklist on my blog, you'll find a few. Here we go. Weekly Dev Tips checklist podcast. Have this transcript ready. I'm gonna move a couple things around since I'm in here. Let's put the 3 seconds of dead silence at the start. Okay, I don't need that there. Okay. Open Audacity, record the show. Somewhere before record the show, I think, would be test the mic. Check the mic and make sure the one you think is recording is the one actually recording in Audacity. There we go. So now we have a new checklist. Didn't follow. I'm following my advice right now. I didn't have that before today, and now today I have it. Don't worry, you won't tell. Come on, this will be on YouTube with your comments right there in the stream. Alright, I think we're ready. So, I did test the mic, as instructed by SurlyDev. So let's, where can someone learn SolidBot? Nice. You realize I'll be laughing during episode 56. Well, that's good. Humor is good. I don't have enough humor in my podcast as it is, I think. It's easier for me to do humor when I can actually see the audience. So I have more humor in my conference talks than I do in my podcast. But your silliness will be preserved for posterity. Yes, it will be. Alright. Let's do this. I'm going to try not to laugh at SurlyDev continuing to post things over there. And I'm going to actually go get a drink of water, because otherwise it's going to be a pain to edit everything. So let me come over here and do the be right back thing, and I'll be right back. Alright, hurry up, SurlyDev. Uh-huh. I think I've heard this joke. I'm not sure it qualifies as clean, but let's see where you go with it.
ha, ha, ooh, he, ha, ha. And I thought my jokes were bad.
How do you know he was deaf? Uh-huh. Almost a clean joke. Alright, let's record real quick. Hi, and welcome back to Weekly Dev Tips. I'm your host, Steve Smith, aka Ardalis. This is episode 57 on the Dependency Inversion Principle. This week's tip is brought to you by devbetter.com. If you need to level up your career, or if you are looking for a mentor, or the support of some motivated, tech-savvy peers, check out devbetter.com. It's a group coaching program I started last year. We meet weekly for group Q&A sessions, and we have an ongoing Slack community in which we chat the rest of the week. I offer advice, there's networking opportunities, we talk about branding and marketing and how to find and improve your career and your job prospects, and we do assignments and check out code and share different types of things we're working on. Check it out at devbetter.com if you're interested. Alright, so now we have reached the end, and in my opinion, the most important of the solid principles that we started talking about a few episodes ago. The D in solid stands for dependency inversion. The dependency inversion principle, or DIP for short, has a longer definition than most of the other principles, and is often conflated with the related coding technique dependency inversion, or DI. The principle states that high-level modules should not depend on low-level modules. Both should depend on abstractions, which would be interfaces or abstract types. And further, it goes on to say abstractions should not depend on details, but rather details, or in this case, concrete implementations, should depend on abstractions. So let's look quickly at each of these two parts. The first part talks about high-level and low-level modules. The level of a module has to do with how near or far away it is from some kind of I/O device. That could be the user interface, or it could be a local file or a database server. Low-level modules deal directly with these kinds of I/O devices or destinations. High-level modules don't know about or deal with specific kinds of I/O. These are going to be things like business logic classes and behavior that models how your system works at a high level. You know, how the behavior works, how the workflow goes, what the validation rules are on a customer, or things like that. In many systems that don't use abstractions, high-level modules depend directly on low-level modules, or the high-level logic is mixed in with low-level concerns in the same modules. Both of these approaches violate the dependency inversion principle. Instead, these methods should communicate with one another using abstractions like C# or Java interfaces. Both kinds of modules would depend on a common interface, typically with the low-level module implementing the interface and the high-level module calling it. So in this case, I'm talking more about a low-level class or type implementing the interface and the high-level class calling it. The second part of the dependency inversion principle suggests that abstractions, typically interfaces, should not depend on details. So an example of this would be if you had an interface for fetching information about a customer. One approach, if you were pulling that information out of a database, would be to write the interface so that it returned a SQL data reader as its return type. Inside of that SQL data reader would be the record and the information about the customer. Unfortunately, though, this exposes the details of how that data is stored or how it's retrieved, since you would only use a SQL data reader to fetch data from a SQL Server database. One benefit of following the dependency inversion principle is modularity. You could change that interface to return a simple list of customer type, and that list of customer could come from any number of different storage locations, whether databases or files or in-memory stores or even web APIs. So the benefit of not depending on the details in your interface is that you have multiple different ways that you could implement that interface. So that covers how abstractions should not depend on details, but what about that last bit that says that details should not depend on abstractions? Let's talk about your sorry. All right, where was I? What about the last? That's talking about your low-level modules that actually communicate with I/O. These should depend on your interfaces by implementing them. As an aside, I think I said modules in here when I probably meant to say types or classes in some places. So I think I'll update that right here. That's talking about your low-level classes that actually communicate with I/O or other infrastructure concerns. These should depend on your interfaces by implementing them. If you're building a system composed of multiple projects, it can be extremely difficult to follow the dependency inversion principle if you don't structure your project dependencies appropriately. This means ensuring that your abstractions, your interfaces, live in a project alongside your business model entities, and that your implementation details live in a separate project that references this one. I have a GitHub repository and a solution template called Clean Architecture, and you can use this as a starting point for new ASP.NET Core applications that need to follow solid principles and use the clean architecture. You'll find a link to it in the show notes, or you can just Google Ardalis Clean Architecture and you'll find it as one of the top hits. A key benefit of following clean architecture One key benefit of clean architecture that the dependency inversion principle enables is that your business model has no dependencies on external infrastructure concerns. These dependencies are a huge part of why legacy codebases are often difficult or impossible to write unit tests for. By keeping these dependencies separate and in their own project that other projects do not depend upon, it makes it much easier to unit test the most important part of your application, its business domain model. I talk more about this in my DDD Fundamentals class, that's Domain-Driven Design Fundamentals, which is a course I did with Julie Lerman on Pluralsight, if you'd like to see this in action. There's a full sample application that goes along with it, so you can see how the different projects interact with one another and how those dependencies flow. You can also check out the free eShop on Web reference application that I built for Microsoft and its companion book, Architecting Modern Web Applications with ASP.NET Core and Microsoft Azure. It's a PDF that you can download for free off the project's website. That's it for this week, and that's it for the solid principles. If you want to hear more from me, go to ardalis.com/tips, sign up for a free tip in your inbox every Wednesday, and also check me out on twitch.tv, where I'm usually streaming on Fridays at noon Eastern Time. I actually just finished streaming this podcast as I was recording it. Thanks for subscribing to Weekly Dev Tips, and I'll see you next week with another great developer tip. All right, what time is it? We got 5 minutes left. I am not going to finish editing this in 5 minutes, but I think most of you probably don't want to watch me edit it anyway. It usually takes me about as long or twice as long, somewhere between 1 and 2 times as long as the thing to edit it. So if this is a 7.5 minute thing, it's going to be shorter than that when I'm done because I'm going to pull some of this stuff out. It's going to end up being about 6.5 minutes. It's going to take me probably 15 or 20 minutes to actually do that editing, as you saw previously. So let's go check out who's out there on Twitch that we might want to raid. And thank you all for checking us out. I hope it was worthwhile for you. If you have any feedback, if you have any questions, if there's more of this you want to see, please let me know. And it doesn't have to be on podcasting. If there's particular topics that you want, let me know. Because I can try and add them. All right, where's our Twitch live coders team? Twitch. Let's see who's there. I tend to try and focus on those. Team live coders. There we go. And this is going to start playing stuff. So who we got? Lena. I think I called her Luna earlier. So Lena, Instafluff, Clarkio, and me. So and I'm always the last one here because these people are better than I am. Let's. I've never rated Instafluff. What's that person doing? Oh, they're doing an ad. Great, that's helpful. Go past the ad. Instafluff, they aren't better. I'm pretty ruthless. You just got more friends. Oh, they have more friends. Alright, so what are you working on here, Instafluff? You have a very fancy looking setup there. That's weird that you have a camera focused right at you while you're looking at the screen. That's cool. I wonder what that looks like from the side. Modding The Sims. See, all these people are like gamer type people. I do like enterprise software. It's not quite as sexy and certainly not Twitch's main demographic. Let's see what Clarky is doing. You gonna show me another ad? No. Look, he's got an actual editor open working on code. That wins. We're gonna raid Clarkio, even though I've done that a bunch of times. So, hope you guys have a nice weekend. Thanks for coming. And C# Fritz was still going? Wow. Alright. Well, we're gonna do. Hang on, that might change. C#. Thought I saw him there. No, alright, we'll do Clarkio. It's fine. Do. Clarkio. Alright. Yeah, I should be here next week. Have a nice weekend, everybody. So I've got like 20 people in the chat, it looks like, but only 9 viewers that are rating. Alright, let me stop streaming and see you later.